It disturbs me how much I see black men and women play the blame game and point the finger at each other like we're some 5 year olds on a playground. But today, the playground is social media. And that's part of the reason I deleted my Twitter account because I feel like that's all I saw on there. It was never constructive or productive conversations. It always seemed like it was a gender war. Black men don't do this, black women don't do that. And it always seemed like the messages were filled with ego and bitterness. You think about the fact that there's 8 billion people on the planet. Not exactly sure what the percentage of black people make up that 8 billion, but it's safe to say it's way more black people than you've personally dealt with in your life. So to generalize all black men is one thing, or to generalize all black women is one thing, I feel like that's nonsense. And I feel like it's pretty close minded because if you think about the fact, let's just say there are 700 million black people in the whole entire world, African Americans, Africans, Afro Latinos, people who are, heavily melanated. Let's just say there's 700 million of us. You've only dealt with a couple hundred black people. It's not fair to generalize all black people as the couple hundred black people that you've personally dealt with, because 9 times out of 10, you've dealt with a certain type of black people because there's something in you that you haven't healed. The black men and women on your Twitter timeline are not a reflection of all black men and women. Black men and women on reality TV and even on the Shade Room, they are not a reflection of all black men and women. And last but not least, the black men or women you've attempted to date or dated, they're also not a reflection of all black men and women either. The truth is, like attracts like. What you focus on expands. So if you focus on the Shade Room and reality TV, even these black men versus black women debates on social media, if that's where your focus is, that's going to shape your perception in a negative way.
A lot of the things that we are saying and teaching, the rhetoric that we are venting, is based on our anger with one another. You see, the man is angry with the woman, especially in my community, the black community, the African American community. The black man is angry with the black woman. The black woman is angry with the black man. And in a lot of cases, for good reasons. But the younger generation is supposed to learn from the older generation. And it's no mystery that we have a younger generation of women like the dear heart I'm talking about, who comes and says, Pastor, teach me what it means to be a wife and how to do so. It's because when they look at most of, not all the time, when they look at most of the examples of womanhood and manhood, husbands and wives, there are poor to none in their circle.
Definitely agree with everything he said, but it did make me wonder why. Why is it like that? Why don't a lot of us personally have black married couples that we can look up to as a good example, excluding celebrities? And I think there's two reasons why. Number one, lack of accountability. If you keep having the same issue with different people, you have to acknowledge the fact that you're the common denominator. I had to admit that to myself because I'm not going to lie, in my early 20s, I was like, all men are dogs, men are this, men are that. I'm so perfect. What man wouldn't want me? But I didn't realize, girl, you had low self esteem and you had a lot of unresolved trauma that you had no idea about. Let's say you end up having a kid with somebody you're unequally yoked with, and you have all this unresolved trauma that you haven't healed. 9 times out of 10, you're going to pass that trauma on to your child. And I feel like as Black people collectively, we have a lot of unresolved trauma. And I feel like that's why we constantly butt heads and there's this disconnect. The second reason is because of slavery. As much as we try to act like, oh, slavery was 160 years ago, we should be over it by now. The Jews are still allowed to be emotional about the Holocaust. So why is it that Black people have to get over slavery? And it's not the fact that we don't want to get over slavery. It's the simple fact that it still affects us to this day subconsciously. A lot of things that we do, we don't realize we are subconsciously influenced and programmed from slavery. Think about the fact that Black people sometimes they can go a little overboard with how they discipline their kids. Sometimes the whoopings are on the verge of abuse. but we feel like that's okay. We feel like that's normal because of the fact that when we were slaves, if we stepped out of line, the slave master was whipping us back in line. The slave master might have even beat the crap out of us in front of the other slaves to make an example out of us. And we subconsciously do that with our kids. A lot of times during slavery, the black families would get split up. The man would get sold to a different plantation, and his wife and children would be sold to a completely different plantation. Even if they decided to let the black man stay with his wife and children, a lot of times the slave master would end up using his wife as a concubine. He would use the black woman as his side piece against her will. Can you imagine how much that emasculated her husband? Even though you have your white wife, you still want my black woman to be your side piece, even though you know I'm her husband. Can you imagine what kind of mental stress that caused to the black man? By the way, he wasn't even legally her husband, not because he didn't want to be, but because black people didn't have civil rights, so they weren't even legally allowed to be married. And I feel like all those things play a role in the fact that a lot of us grow up in broken homes. I feel like we carry a lot of the pain and trauma of our ancestors, and we don't have to, but we continue to because we don't have awareness. Another thing I wanted to mention is during slavery, slave masters would have the black men fight each other for their entertainment. They would force them to fight each other just for their entertainment, and they would place bets on them. The slaves wouldn't get paid to fight each other, and they did it against their will. I feel like that plays a part in the fact that a lot of black men are desensitized to killing and hurting each other. We can't change our history as black people, but I think it's important for us to talk about it so we can understand how it affects us and learn from it. Another problem we have as black people is too much pride. On one hand, it's good that we have some type of pride, and it's understandable because we've been through a lot as a race. But on the other hand, it's a bad thing because if you have too much pride, it's going to be hard for you to soften up to your partner. If you have too much pride, it's going to be hard for you to apologize when you're wrong. I feel like in that aspect, pride can be your downfall. And I feel like until you let go of that bitterness, it's going to be hard for you to move forward because you're not open and receptive. The reason why you're not open and receptive is because you're still carrying that ancestral baggage and even some baggage from this lifetime. I think another thing that adds on to that bitterness is when you take advice from other people that are bitter because you're allowing them to misguide you. This can be friends or family members who are bitter from their past experiences with the opposite sex, or it can even be public figures who have some type of bitterness towards the opposite sex as well. For example, there are certain male podcasts that spew out negativity and toxicity and generalize all women based on a small group of women. And even though they do have valid points from time to time, overall, they're not really helping the men that follow them. They're actually fueling their bitterness. And I'm not being biased because I'm a woman, because there's actually male podcasts that I listen to that I feel are positive and constructive. One male podcast that I listen to is the Nice and Neat podcast, so make sure you guys check them out. Yeah, if I had to summarize the things that hold black people back, I would say the three things would be lack of accountability, too much pride, and unresolved trauma. So that's just something to think about. Hopefully this video was insightful and enlightening. If you have anything that you want to, add on to it, please feel free to leave that in the comments. If you feel like this video resonated with you, make sure you like it and make sure you subscribed. And yeah, I'll see you guys soon. Bye.